Among all the leg choices in Armored Core, quads have always been the awkward middle child in the family. They are defined by their ability to use high-powered weapons without completely sacrificing mobility. However, as each new generation adjusts game mechanics and features, the quad suffers from an almost constant identity crisis. Let's take some time today to look at how these beautiful but awkward four-legged machines have evolved throughout the years. This is a brief history of quads. Starting in Armored Core 1, quads make a great first impression. With a mechanic that will repeat for the next two generations, quads differentiate themselves by being able to fire cannons while touching the ground. This is in contrast to bipeds that need to crouch in place to fire cannons, as well as tanks that can fire without restriction. Now, with quads striking a sort of middle ground in terms of cannon mechanics, it would be logical for you to expect them to also strike a middle ground in terms of mobility. However, you would be very wrong. Quads in Gen 1 have similar weights to bipeds, while also sporting amazing walking speed. Walking speed so high that it can compete with most boosters. The biggest downside of Gen 1 quad legs are their high energy drain and their semi-restrictive load limits. And even then, the energy drain is offset by its amazing walking speed, which lessens the need to use boosters in the first place. Overall, quads made a strong showing in Armored Core's debut generation. Moving on to Generation 2, both mechanical changes and new competition both made it harder for quads to stand out. First off, in Generation 2, the difference between boost speed and walking speed was notably widened. What was previously near parity with boosters is now just a nice-to-have feature. Not only was walking speed universally nerfed, but the newly introduced float leg type now gave it serious competition in its niche of ground-based mobility. While not boasting any enhanced cannon abilities, float types had lower energy drain, more movement options, and the ability to move over deep water. Gen 2 also introduced the overboost mechanic, which allowed for high-speed maneuvers regardless of leg choice or booster. While every AC was able to benefit from the overboost option, it was very impactful for tanks, which had low mobility otherwise. As a result, quads had their niche eaten away at two sides of the spectrum, its ground ability nerfed, and tanks finding greater relevance. The niche of the quad narrowed considerably in the second generation. As Gen 3 rolled around, there was a fundamental change to the movement style of the quad. In the previous two generations, the quad would glide across the ground, and activating the booster would cause it to rise upward. This was very much akin to the way the tank moved, albeit at much different speeds. This is in contrast to the biped movement style that also allowed for grounded boosts. In Gen 3, quads joined bipeds in the Grounded Boost Club. On top of that, quads transitioned from a gliding movement style to a nifty walk cycle. In tandem with the movement style change, the quad's walking speed was nerfed to that of a middleweight biped. Trading walking speed for the ability to ground boost was very reasonable though. Gaining access to an evasive option that didn't require to go airborne, which prevented cannon usage, proved to be rather useful. Despite Gen 3 having the largest list of games by a wide margin, there weren't any other major changes. Quads held a comfortable but sometimes overlooked niche in this long generation. Gen 4 was an exceptionally powerful generation. It's known for its high speeds, primal armor, and most relevant to this video, universal access to cannons. Regardless of leg type, ACs were capable of firing the powerful bat cannons. However, cannon usage was a big part of the quad's identity, so once again, the quad had to be somewhat reinvented. While every leg type was able to fire cannons, quads specialized in it with their high firing stability. This stat allowed the quad to fire high-recoil ballistic weapons without succumbing to a brief recoil-induced stun effect. Quads also had a less obvious gimmick in Generation 4. That was that they had a significantly higher top speed compared to other legs, notably higher than even lightweight bipeds. However, it did require the quad to build up that top speed by maintaining movement in the same direction for a few seconds. These traits were both useful on their own, but together made them ideal users of sniper cannons. The high mobility allowing them to dictate the engagement range, and the firing stability preventing them from slowing down. Quadrupeds received a minor name change to Tetrapod in Gen 5. The meaning is almost the same, both referring to something with 4 limbs, but they do have different meanings in the realms of biology. Anyways, with the shift to Gen 5, cannon limitations were reintroduced. Tanks continued to use cannons without limitations. However, bipeds and tetrapods both required a stationary firing stance to use cannons. There is a notable difference between the firing stance of a biped and a tetrapod. Bipeds hunker down behind a heavily armored leg, increasing their defensive performance. Tetrapods, on the other hand, brace themselves in a way to provide higher stability, letting them fire their cannons more rapidly than other leg types. This offensive but vulnerable stance was well suited for the sniper cannon and other long-range cannon types. After a nearly 10-year gap between titles, we arrive at the most recent game in the franchise, Armored Core 6. Expectantly, tetrapods have once again been reinvented. While no longer suffering from the large energy drain of previous generations, quads are instead very heavy, sitting just between heavy bipeds and heavy tank legs. Tetrapods were also gifted with a totally unique movement style, the aerial hover. While bipeds can't handle high recoil weapons without bracing for recoil, and tanks can handle all without issue, what the tetrapod can handle depends on the weapon and whether or not it's hovering. Charged up weapons like the linear rifle and laser rifles can be fired regardless of state. It can also use the plasma and explosive thrower melee weapons without stopping in place. However, back-mounted cannons and heavy recoil weapons like the bazooka require the hovering stance if you don't want to be stopped in place. Flavor-wise, this new hover stance is simultaneously in and out of character for the 4-leg type. It's out of character in that the tetrapod has shifted focus from being a more grounded fighter to more of an aerial type. It's in character if you remember how they moved back in their infancy. The hover stance harkens back to its movement style in Gen 1 and Gen 2, where it hovered across the ground. Anyway, that's it for today. While they've never been my most used leg type, they have been my favorite. Watching them evolve with the times has been an interesting, if not sometimes painful experience. I hope that now you can share in a little bit of the love I have for this awkwardly placed leg type. This has been AO. Take it easy. Bye.